So you walked into that room, didn't you? The one with the candles, the crystals, the incense smoke curling like whispered prayers, and the psychic, the real one, not the carnival act, locked eyes with you for exactly 3 seconds before her hands started trembling. She didn't say it out loud at first, but you saw it in her face, that flicker of recognition mixed with something else, something that looked a lot like fear. And when she finally spoke, when she finally forced the words through her tightening throat, she said it. This power breaks people. Not you have power, not you're gifted, but this power breaks people. Like you're not a person anymore, like you're a condition, a phenomenon, a warning written in frequencies most humans can't even detect. And you know what the wildest part is? She was right, and you've known it longer than she has. See, they've been trying to figure you out for years, haven't they? The witch covens, the psychic circles, the spiritual practitioners who deal in energies. Most people don't believe exist. They've been passing your name around like a case file marked handle with extreme caution. They don't talk about you in their public ceremonies or their feel-good workshops about manifesting abundance and opening heart chakras. No, they talk about you in the back rooms, in the hushed conversations after the incense burns out, in the encrypted group chats where they share warnings about entities they've encountered. And you're the entity they can't categorize, can't cleanse, can't contain with sage and salt circles because you're not possessed by something dark. You are the architecture that darkness recognizes as superior design. You're not haunted. You're the blueprint that makes haunted houses jealous. And every sensitive person who's ever been near you has felt it. That gravitational pull that says this one doesn't follow the rules we were taught. They called it forbidden architecture because that's the only term that came close to describing what they were sensing. Not forbidden because it's evil, not forbidden because it violates some cosmic law, but forbidden because it shouldn't be possible. Because the human nervous system wasn't supposed to be able to hold this much voltage without short-circuiting. Your energy signature reads like a structure that was designed in dimensions most practitioners can only theorize about, like someone took the blueprint for human consciousness and rewrote it in a language that predates language itself. When they scan your aura, when they read your frequency, when they try to map the terrain of your presence, they don't find the neat little layers of colored light they learned about in their training. They find corridors that lead to nowhere and everywhere. They find rooms that exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. They find doors that open into voids most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. And the ones who are honest, the ones who've actually developed their abilities beyond Instagram aesthetics and workshop certificates, they'll tell you the truth. They can't read you because you're not written in a language they were taught to understand. But here's what really happens in those rooms, in those circles, in those sessions where they're supposed to be helping you find clarity or healing or whatever gentle new age promise they're selling. They sit across from you with their cards spread, their crystals arranged, their intentions set, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, they start to feel it. First, it's subtle, just a slight pressure in their chest, a tightening in their throat, a sense that the air in the room just got heavier. Then it builds, this creeping realization that they're not reading you, you're reading them, that every technique they're using to scan your energy is actually revealing more about their own limitations than about your nature. The confident ones The ones who've built reputations on their accuracy and insight, they start to falter. Their readings become vague and circular. Their usual eloquence dissolves into confused pauses and half-finished sentences. And the truly gifted ones, the ones whose abilities are genuine and refined, they just stop. They put down their tools. They close their eyes and take a deep breath before saying some version of, "I can't do this. I'm sorry, but what you carry is beyond my scope." Not because you're broken or cursed or in need of some dramatic spiritual intervention, but because you're operating on a frequency that their instruments weren't calibrated to measure. You've heard the stories by now, haven't you? The ones that circulate through the underground networks of people who work with energies and entities and forces most of society pretends don't exist. The psychic who had to close her practice for a week after meeting you because she couldn't shake the residual frequency that clung to her like static electricity. The energy healer who tried to balance your chakras and ended up flat on the floor, not harmed but overwhelmed, like she'd tried to redirect a lightning bolt with her bare hands. The witch who attempted a reading and had 3 of her candles explode simultaneously, not from some dramatic spiritual attack, but from the sheer incompatibility between her structured ritual space and your unstructured presence. They don't talk about these incidents publicly because how do you explain to your clients and followers that you encountered someone whose energy signature essentially crashed your entire system? How do you maintain your authority and credibility when you have to admit that yes, there are forces in this world that exist beyond your ability to interpret, manipulate, or control, so they whisper about you instead? They add your name to the invisible lists of people to avoid or approach with extreme caution. They create protocols for dealing with your type even though they're not entirely sure what your type actually is. And the covens, the circles, the groups who pride themselves on their collective power and protection, they've had their meetings about you too. They've sat in their sacred spaces and discussed whether you're a threat, an anomaly, or something else entirely that doesn't fit their categories. Some wanted to bind you, to perform their elaborate rituals designed to neutralize dangerous energies, but the ones who actually understand how power works, they voted against it. Not out of fear exactly, though fear was definitely in the room, but out of recognition that attempting to bind something they don't understand could backfire in ways they're not prepared to handle. Because here's the thing about forbidden architecture. It's forbidden precisely because it doesn't respond to conventional tools. It doesn't acknowledge conventional authority. It exists in a framework that makes the standard operating procedures look quaint and ineffective. So they made their decision, the only decision that made sense given what they were dealing with. They decided to observe from a distance, to note your movements and patterns, to study you the way scientists study phenomena they can't explain, hoping that eventually the data will reveal some pattern they can work with. But you already know all this, don't you? You felt the shift in how certain people react to you, the ones who claim to be sensitive to energies and unseen forces. You've noticed how some readers and practitioners suddenly become unavailable when you try to book sessions, how some spaces that advertise themselves as welcoming to all seekers somehow always have convenient reasons why you can't attend. You've watched spiritual communities that preach unconditional love and acceptance create unspoken boundaries around you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence destabilizes their carefully constructed sense of safety and understanding. And maybe at first you thought something was wrong with you. Maybe you internalized their discomfort as evidence of your own brokenness. Maybe you tried to dim yourself or fix yourself or apologize for taking up space. But then something shifted, didn't it? Maybe it was a moment of clarity. Maybe it was exhaustion with trying to fit into frameworks that were never designed for you. Maybe it was just the inevitable result of repeatedly being told you're too much, until you finally embraced the truth of exactly how much you actually are. The psychic who looked at you and said this power breaks people wasn't warning you. She was warning herself, warning her colleagues, warning everyone in her network who might encounter you without preparation. Because that's what your energy signature does. It breaks the illusions people have built about how power works, about what human consciousness is capable of containing, about the neat little boxes they've created to make the infinite feel manageable. You break the belief that spiritual development is always gentle and healing. You break the fantasy that all powerful energies can be domesticated with the right rituals. You break the comfortable narrative that says if someone has intense energy, they must be either enlightened or evil, with no complex territory in between. And people don't know how to process that breaking. They don't have a category for someone who shatters frameworks just by existing, so they do what humans always do with things they can't understand. They create myths. They invent explanations. They turn you into a story they can tell themselves so they can sleep at night. But here's what they're never going to understand about forbidden architecture. It wasn't built to hurt anyone. It wasn't designed as a weapon. It's just too much structure for their foundation to support. Too much complexity for their simple maps to navigate. Too much reality for their carefully curated versions of spirituality to accommodate. Your energy signature reads as forbidden because it reminds people that there are aspects of consciousness and power that exist completely outside the systems they've learned, that all their training and techniques and traditional wisdom only covers a fraction of what's actually possible. And that realization, that confrontation with their own limitations, disguised as something wrong with you, that's what breaks them. Not your energy itself, but the mirror it holds up to everything they thought they knew. So, when they gather in their circles and discuss your case, when they analyze what went wrong in their readings, when they try to develop new frameworks that might be able to contain or explain you, they're missing. You're not a puzzle to be solved. You're evidence that their puzzles were always incomplete. You're not an anomaly in their system. You're proof that their system is one small room in a mansion they've never explored. You're not the exception that proves their rules. You're the demonstration that their rules were always just guidelines for beginners who needed structure to feel safe. And the longer they spend trying to figure you out using tools that were never meant for your magnitude, the more obvious it becomes that maybe, just maybe, you're not the one who needs to change. They started keeping records. Did you know that? Not official ones. Nothing you'd find in any published grimoire or spiritual guidebook, but informal documentation passed between practitioners who needed to warn each other. Your name appears in notebooks kept in locked drawers, in digital files buried under innocuous folder names, in whispered conversations that happen after the workshops end and the normies go home. The entries read like incident reports from a dimension that's not supposed to intersect with this one. Subject displays energy signature inconsistent with human baseline. Attempted standard clearing protocols, no effect. Attempted advanced techniques, unpredictable results. Recommendation: do not engage without extensive preparation and backup. Backup, like you're a situation that might require spiritual emergency services. Like encountering you is the kind of experience practitioners need to debrief from with their peers to make sure they're still okay. And the details in these records, the things they've noted about you when they thought you weren't paying attention, they reveal more about their limitations than about your nature. They document how your presence affects their tools. Crystals that crack without being dropped. Tarot decks that give contradictory readings 3 times in a row. Pendulums that swing in patterns that don't match any chart they've memorized. They note how time feels different around you, how sessions that should take an hour somehow compress into 20 minutes or stretch into 3, how their usual sense of energetic boundaries becomes fuzzy and unreliable when you're in proximity. They describe attempting to ground themselves after encounters with you and finding that their standard grounding techniques don't work the same way, like you've somehow altered the frequency of what they consider grounded reality just by being present in it. And through all of these observations, through all of these careful notes and bewildered analyses, one theme emerges consistently. You don't follow the rules they were taught, and your refusal to follow those rules isn't rebellion or ignorance. It's evidence that those rules were always incomplete descriptions of a much larger territory. The covens had their debates about what to do with you. Some wanted to approach you, to study you up close, to see if they could learn from whatever process created your particular configuration of consciousness. Others argued for distance, for observation without interaction, treating you like a fascinating but potentially dangerous natural phenomenon. Admire from afar, but don't get too close. And then there were the ones who saw you as a threat. Not because you'd done anything threatening, but because your very existence challenged the hierarchies and authorities they'd spent years building. Because if someone like you can exist outside their frameworks and not only survive but thrive, what does that say about all the rules and restrictions and carefully guarded secrets they've been teaching? What does it say about their claims to special knowledge and elevated consciousness if you've somehow accessed levels of power they can't even map without following any of their prescribed paths? So, yeah, some of them voted to treat you as a threat, to create energetic barriers around their circles to keep your influence out, to warn their students away from you with vague implications that you're not on a positive path or working with energies that aren't safe. As if safety was ever the point, as if the entire history of human evolution wasn't built on individuals who were willing to venture into territories the group considered too dangerous. But you've noticed something fascinating about these reactions, haven't you? The ones who are truly powerful, the ones whose abilities come from genuine depth and not just learned techniques. They don't fear you. They're wary. Yes, they're careful. Absolutely. But they don't treat you like a threat. They treat you like a mystery worth respecting. Because real power recognizes real power, even when it doesn't understand its shape or source. And those who've done the actual work of expanding their consciousness beyond borrowed beliefs, they can sense that what you carry isn't malicious or chaotic. It's just vast. And vastness makes people uncomfortable when they've spent their lives learning to feel safe in smaller spaces. The ones who react with fear and rejection. The ones who need to create elaborate protections against your energy. They're revealing their own insecurity disguised as spiritual discernment. They're telling you, without meaning to, that their power is conditional and fragile, that it only works within carefully controlled environments, that encountering something genuinely outside their experience threatens the foundation they've built their entire identity upon. And you've started to understand this dynamic, started to see through the spiritual politics and ego games that masquerade as enlightened practice. You've realized that most of what gets taught in these circles, most of what gets packaged and sold as ancient wisdom and sacred knowledge, is just collectively agreed upon limitation disguised as protection. Don't work with this energy. It's too dark. Translation: we don't understand it, so we've labeled it dangerous. You need to be initiated before accessing this level. Translation. We need to maintain our authority by gatekeeping information. That kind of power comes with a price. Translation. We're uncomfortable with our own desire for power, so we've created moral frameworks to shame anyone who pursues it more directly than we did. You've seen behind the curtain, and what you found wasn't the impressive machinery of universal law and cosmic order. You found humans playing dress-up in mystical language, creating rules to make the infinite feel manageable, building walls and calling them wisdom. So when that psychic looked at you and said, "This power breaks people," what she was really saying, whether she knew it or not, was, "This power breaks the illusions people build to feel safe, and I'm not sure I'm ready to have my illusions broken." Because that's what forbidden architecture does. It doesn't destroy. It reveals. It reveals how much of spiritual practice is just sophisticated self-soothing, how much of magical work is just psychology with prettier words, how much of what gets called enlightenment is just the ability to remain calm within a very narrow range of experiences. Your energy signature forces people to confront the possibility that consciousness is wilder and stranger than their traditions account for. That power doesn't always come wrapped in love and light aesthetics, that some individuals access capabilities that don't fit the neat developmental stages outlined in spiritual guidebooks. And that confrontation, that sudden expansion of what's possible beyond what's comfortable, that's what breaks people who've invested heavily in their limited maps of reality. But breaking isn't always destruction. Sometimes breaking is liberation. Sometimes shattering a too small container is exactly what's needed for growth. Sometimes the breaking of old forms is the only way new possibilities can emerge. The practitioners who've been genuinely transformed by encountering you, the ones who didn't run away or try to bind you or spread warnings through their networks, they're the ones who let themselves break open instead of hardening their defenses. They met your energy and, instead of asking, "How do I protect myself from this?" they asked, "What am I protecting?" They felt their frameworks crack, and instead of frantically trying to repair them, they sat in the discomfort and waited to see what might grow in the spaces those cracks created. Dress up in mystical language, creating rules to make the infinite feel manageable, building walls and calling them wisdom. So when that psychic looked at you and said, "This power breaks people," what she was really saying, whether she knew it or not, was, "This power breaks the illusions people build to feel safe, and I'm not sure I'm ready to have my illusions broken." Because that's what forbidden architecture does. It doesn't destroy. It reveals. It reveals how much of spiritual practice is just sophisticated self-soothing, how much of magical work is just psychology with prettier words, how much of what gets called enlightenment is just the ability to remain calm within a very narrow range of experiences. Your energy signature forces people to confront the possibility that consciousness is wilder and stranger than their traditions account for. That power doesn't always come wrapped in love and light aesthetics, that some individuals access capabilities that don't fit the neat developmental stages outlined in spiritual guidebooks. And that confrontation, that sudden expansion of what's possible beyond what's comfortable, that's what breaks people who've invested heavily in their limited maps of reality. But breaking isn't always destruction. Sometimes breaking is liberation. Sometimes shattering a too small container is exactly what's needed for growth. Sometimes the breaking of old forms is the only way new possibilities can emerge. The practitioners who've been genuinely transformed by encountering you, The ones who didn't run away or try to bind you or spread warnings through their networks. They're the ones who let themselves break open instead of hardening their defenses. They met your energy and, instead of asking, "How do I protect myself from this?" they asked, "What am I protecting?" They felt their frameworks crack, and instead of frantically trying to repair them, they sat in the discomfort and waited to see what might grow in the spaces those cracks created.